This is the first screencast for Chapter 11, Solid Waste Generation and Disposal. And really, it should say Solid Waste Generation, Transportation, Use, and Disposal. Before I get into the chapter, I would like to go back a slide and introduce you to a concept from the very last chapter that we will be talking about during chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. That concept is environmental justice. Environmental justice is a social movement which focuses on the equal enforcement of environmental laws. It also focuses on eliminating disparities in exposure of environmental harms to different ethnic and socioeconomic groups. So as we go through the chapters, we will be pointing out, or I will be pointing out to you, different examples of when environmental justice came into play, when there was a need for environmental laws to be more equally enforced, and there was a need for elimination of disparities in exposure to environmental harms. Okay, so first the main point to trash. Solid waste is waste that is produced that cannot be used by other organisms. Usually it is synthetic, something that humans have synthesized. But it may also be from a biological product like paper made from wood. So the main point in this chapter is that there is no such thing as throwing trash away. It goes somewhere. It may be away from your home, but it doesn't disappear from Earth. And in fact, many times people believe that when it goes into a landfill, then it's going to be breaking down and eventually become organic matter in the soil. And that is, in fact, not how it works. So let's find out how it does work. First, I want to go through the objectives for this chapter. Students will be able to define waste. Students will understand that only humans generate waste, and the amount of waste is increasing in recent decades, both due to increasing population size and increasing wealth and cultural reasons. 3, there is no away for waste. There are options such as landfills and incineration, which each have their pros and cons and can be done in better or worse ways, depending. So we'll look at those. 4th, reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost of solid waste is extremely important, because the less we have going into a landfill or for incineration, the better. And these first 3 are in the order of importance. Number 1 would be to reduce the amount of waste generated. Second best thing would be to reuse an object. And third best would be to recycle. Composting is right up there with reduce. In fact, it's one of the ways that waste can be reduced. And we'll look at the role of individuals, manufacturers, and government in encouraging reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. 5, special care must be taken with hazardous waste. Hazardous waste can include anything from pharmaceuticals to paints, and special care must be taken. They can't just be thrown in the trash. And so we'll take a look at which things are hazardous waste, particularly hazardous waste in one's own home, and then what types of measures can be taken to keep it out of landfills. 6, we will use life cycle analysis and integrative waste management systems, or talk about those, to make optimal decisions regarding waste. 7, everything is interconnected. Air, water, and soil are all interconnected, and they're also interconnected globally. So when we throw some trash into a landfill, we may, in fact, contaminate air, water, and soil, all 3 of those just from that one act. So we'll look at how that happens. And last, throughout the chapter, we will look at the concept of environmental justice. So here's a case study about plastic versus paper, and it's really about styrofoam versus paper. And as we look at this case study, we will be doing a life cycle analysis, cradle to grave. Cradle means when it was manufactured, grave means when it was placed in a landfill or incinerated. And when we do this analysis, we'll consider all of the energy and materials that are required to produce, transport, and dispose of a plastic cup versus a paper cup. So when we're talking about plastic here, we're talking about the phasing out of styrofoam cups and the replacement of those with paper cups. It certainly intuitively looks like an environmental success story, but it may not be quite the success when you consider the whole life cycle analysis of each cup. So styrofoam is a type of plastic, so it is made out of petroleum, plus it takes some petroleum to produce it. Paper also takes petroleum to produce it, and the amount is 2 grams for paper versus 3 grams for styrofoam. Paper is made of wood, so that takes 33 grams of wood versus none for styrofoam. But wood is a renewable resource, and as long as we don't harvest it faster than it can be regrown, then that is not an issue. Energy. It actually takes twice as much energy to manufacture a paper cup than a styrofoam cup. And it takes a lot more water to produce a paper cup versus a styrofoam cup. Paper cups are heavier, so transporting them from where they're manufactured to the end user would take up more fossil fuels because they are heavier, whereas styrofoam is lighter. So the lifespan. So paper can be recycled once it's used. We don't typically use paper cups more than once. We could if they had a plastic coating on them, but a lot of them are simply paper. But the good news is that can be recycled, though recycling itself takes energy as well. And a styrofoam cup, in theory, can be reused many times. But realistically, people don't reuse their styrofoam cups. Oops, let me go back a minute. A couple of other considerations that aren't listed on this slide. If you've ever gotten a hot cup of coffee from a Dunkin' Donuts, we typically put another cardboard sleeve around the paper cup so that it doesn't burn our hands. So that is another amount of paper, really easily twice as much paper as went into the paper cup. In theory, you could reuse your little sleeve, but again, most people do not. Other considerations are what happens in its disposal. So again, the paper can be recycled, but the styrofoam will eventually go into a landfill, even if it is reused a number of times first. And plastic never goes away. It's just going to be with us forever and ever, essentially. So, especially plastic in a landfill. So that is not a very good thing. Another thing that we have to look at is any chemicals that might be in either of these. Paper is often bleached, and that may not be, there are questions about whether that's harmful to human health. But likewise, there are questions about plastics, that they might leach toxins into a water, so that also is not that good. And last but not least, if either of these, the paper or the styrofoam, end up in a landfill, landfills are filled with bacteria but not much oxygen. So when that paper is broken down, the bacteria that are breaking it down, called anaerobic bacteria, will produce methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas. And if it was emitted directly from the landfill into the atmosphere, it would be contributing to climate change. It also could be captured and actually used as an energy source. So it really just depends on what happens with it. Okay, let's start with the definition of waste. Waste is anything that is produced but is not useful or is not consumed. And only humans generate waste that cannot be used by other organisms. In the natural world, there are microorganisms, well, not always microorganisms, there are organisms called detritivores and decomposers that recycle waste from other organisms. So detritivores typically use dead tissue and break that down into smaller pieces. Decomposers, typically fungi and bacteria, break them into even smaller molecules such that they can then become nutrients, which feed your soil, make your soil more rich, and can feed things such as plants. Now, a society's wealth and culture affect how much waste is generated. You would probably guess that the wealthier a country is or a society is, the more waste is generated because something new can afford to be purchased. Culture also affects how much waste is generated. In the U.S., cultural changes have occurred since, say, the early 1900s, where now we have planned obsolescence of products such as phones or dishwashers. They are planned to become obsolete. Computers, televisions. And so that culture creates more waste. Now we're going to look at municipal solid waste. Municipal means a town, for example, or city. Solid waste, again, is trash. And so refuse or trash is collected from households, small businesses, institutions such as schools, prisons, municipal buildings such as courthouses, and hospitals, except for the hazardous waste from hospitals. And as you can see, per person, the amount of waste has generally increased from 1960 to about 2009. And then it looks like there's a promising dip. However, according to the EPA website, all the way through 2017, we've actually stayed right up here at the same level. And you can see that the total municipal solid waste, MSW, has increased as well. And it's increased more than the per capita. So think about why that would be. The reason is we have more people. So per person has slowly crept up, but with more people, we have a greater total. And that too has not changed. So basically, in the United States, we have typically thrown away 4.4 to 4.5 pounds of waste per day per person. So if you have a 4-person household, you're giving away, let's see, 18 pounds. You're creating 18 pounds of waste each day typically. That's a lot of waste. Okay, last we'll just look at how that waste can be categorized. First, by composition, you see that 64% is waste that could be composted, potentially. And that does not need to be going into our general trash. And even if it's not composted, you could at least recycle things like paper. But certainly this percentage could be easily composted. And then looking over here, the breakdown of MSW by source, you can see that a big portion of that is containers and packaging. And that's an area that I think has probably even increased more as of 2020, with people buying so many things from places like Amazon, where the items come individually shipped, and they're often in packages that far exceed the size of the actual package. So I'm going to stop it here and go on to the next video or screencast.